April 12, 1937, 3:47 a.m. Sing Sing Correctional Facility, Ossining, New York. Ellsworth, Bumpy, Johnson sat on a steel bunk in cell block D, staring at a telegram that had been delivered 6 hours late. His wife, Mamie, had gone into labor at Harlem Hospital. Complications. The baby was coming early, and Bumpy was locked behind 30-foot walls, 30 miles away, serving a 2-year sentence for policy operations. The guards outside his cell numbered 4 instead of the usual 2. Word had spread fast. When a man like Bumpy Johnson gets emotional news, the warden takes precautions. They'd seen what he could do. They knew his reputation from Lenox Avenue to 145th Street. 53 organized policy banks under his control. 200 men who'd walk through fire on his word. But what the warden didn't know was that Bumpy Johnson had already made the most important decision of his life 3 months ago, the day he learned Mamie was pregnant. He wasn't going to raise a son in his image. This is the story of how a child born in a prison's shadow became the man his father never could be. To understand what happened in 1957, you need to understand what it meant to be Bumpy Johnson's son in 1937 Harlem. Bumpy controlled 60% of the numbers racket in Harlem, a $50 million annual operation. Dutch Schultz had tried to take it and ended up dead in a Newark chop house. Lucky Luciano himself had negotiated treaties with Bumpy. The man had survived 14 assassination attempts. He'd killed 5 men with his bare hands. He was 32 years old and already a legend. But legends don't raise stable children. Bumpy had grown up in the streets of Charleston, South Carolina, watching his brother get lynched at age 15. He'd arrived in Harlem at 21 with $14 in his pocket and a rage that could level buildings. He'd learned power from Stephanie St. Clair, the numbers queen, and violence from the streets that showed him no mercy. Now, at 3:47 a.m. on April 12th, holding a telegram that read son born, mother stable, Theodore Raymond Johnson, 6 pounds 4 ounces, Bumpy understood something that would change everything. The streets had given him power, but they'd taken his soul. The inciting incident had happened 3 months earlier, December 8, 1936. Bumpy had been walking down Lenox Avenue when he saw a kid, maybe 16, wearing a sharp gray suit and a fedora tilted just like Bumpy's. The kid was collecting numbers money, trying to walk like Bumpy, talk like Bumpy. When their eyes met, the kid had smiled with pure admiration. Bumpy saw his future in that smile, and it terrified him. That night, he'd sat with Mamie in their apartment at 409 Edgecombe Avenue, the same building where Thurgood Marshall and W.E.B. Du Bois lived, and made her a promise. This child gets a different life. No streets, no numbers, no reputation, education, legitimacy, whatever it costs. Mamie had looked at him like he'd grown a second head. You gonna stop being Bumpy Johnson? No, he'd said. But my son ain't gonna start. April 13th, 1937, 11 a.m. 26 hours after Theodore's birth, Bumpy made 3 phone calls from the prison warden's office. The warden, a pragmatic man named Charles Kirby who understood that cooperation with Bumpy Johnson kept the prison peaceful, allowed the calls. Bumpy paid him $500 in cash, delivered by a lawyer within the hour. First call, Stephanie St. Clair, the woman who'd taught Bumpy the numbers game. I need a trust fund. $50,000. Untouchable until the boy turns 18. Education only. No exceptions, even for me. Stephanie had laughed. You going soft, Bumpy? I'm going smart. You in or out? I'm in. I'll have the papers drawn by Friday. Second call, Dr. Harold Freeman, a black physician who ran a practice on 135th Street. I need you to be my son's godfather. Not ceremonial. Real. You guide him. You show him there's men in Harlem who build things, not just break them. Dr. Freeman, who'd treated Bumpy's bullet wounds twice, understood immediately. What's his name? Theodore Raymond Johnson. But he's going to be Ray. Nothing that sounds like mine. Third call, Mamie. The conversation lasted 47 minutes. Bumpy laid out the plan, detailed, strategic, 3 moves ahead like always, but this time the opponent was fate itself. Theodore would be raised by Mamie and her sister, Clara, in a home that Bumpy would buy in Sugar Hill, the respectable part of Harlem where doctors and lawyers lived. The boy would attend private schools. He'd be kept away from Bumpy's operations. When people asked, he'd be Raymond Johnson, not Bumpy's son. The street would protect him through silence, not association. And what about you? Mimi had asked. You just gonna be a ghost to your own son? Bumpy's voice went quiet. The guards monitoring the call would later report they'd never heard him sound like that. Vulnerable, almost broken. I'll be in his life. But I won't be his life. Most men would teach their son everything they know. But I ain't most men. And my son ain't gonna be most sons. September 1942 to June 1955. The growing years. Theodore Raymond Johnson, called Ray by everyone except his father, who always used his full first name, grew up in two worlds that never quite touched. There was the official world, 455 Convent Avenue, a four-story brownstone purchased by business investor E. Johnson for $18,000 cash in 1938. Ray attended Ethical Culture Fieldston School, a predominantly white private institution where tuition cost $800 per year, more than most Harlem families made in 6 months. He wore pressed slacks and sweater vests. He carried leather satchels full of Latin textbooks and geometry proofs. His teachers knew him as a quiet, brilliant boy with an absent father who traveled frequently for business. Then there was the truth. His father was the most powerful criminal in Harlem, and everybody knew it except Ray. To understand how Bumpy pulled this off, you need to understand the code he established in 1937 and enforced without mercy for 20 years. Rule 1. No one, not lieutenants, not street soldiers, not policy runners, mentioned Bumpy's son in the streets. The penalty for breaking this rule was immediate exile from Harlem. 3 men were banished over the years for getting drunk and talking too much. Rule 2. Ray was never to see violence, money, or operations. Bumpy conducted all business at locations far from 455 Convent Avenue. He never wore flashy suits or jewelry around his son. He arrived at the brownstone in plain clothes, driving a used Chrysler instead of his Cadillac. Rule 3. The boy would know his father as a consultant who helped local businesses. This wasn't entirely a lie. Bumpy did mediate disputes, arrange loans, and protect shops. Ray just didn't know the full scope. But Bumpy was still his father. He showed up for every birthday, all 18 of them, even when he had to postpone meetings with Frank Costello or postpone peace talks with the Genovese family. He taught Ray to play chess, spending hours explaining strategy, patience, thinking 3 moves ahead. He attended every school play, sitting in the back row in his plain gray suit, leaving before the lights came up. October 15, 1948. Ray's 11th birthday. Bumpy arrived at 6 p.m. with a gift-wrapped copy of The Count of Monte Cristo by Alexander Dumas. They sat in the study, Bumpy in the leather chair, Ray on the floor, while Bumpy explained who Dumas was. He was a black man, Theodore, grandson of a slave. Became the most successful writer in France. Wrote about revenge, strategy, justice. This book right here, it's about a man who got betrayed, locked up, and came back smarter than everybody who put him there. Ray looked at the book, then at his father. Is that what you do, Papa? Help people get justice? Bumpy's jaw tightened. What the boy didn't know was that earlier that day, Bumpy had ordered a man beaten in an alley off 143rd Street for skimming $3,000 from a policy bank. I try, son, in my own way. That's when Bumpy understood the tightrope he was walking. Every lie of omission was a form of protection. Every half-truth was a gift. Most men would have told their sons everything. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. March 22, 1955, 4:35 p.m. Columbia University Library, Morningside Heights. Theodore Raymond Johnson, age 17, senior at Fieldston, was researching a term paper on organized crime's impact on urban communities. He was alone in the periodicals section, flipping through microfilm of the New York Amsterdam News from 1937. He found the article by accident. Bumpy Johnson sentenced. Numbers King gets 2 years. There was a photograph. His father, younger, harder, wearing a 3-piece suit, being led into court by 2 detectives. The article detailed his operations: policy banking, enforcement, territorial control, estimated annual income of $500,000. Theodore read it 3 times. Then he searched for more. 1938. Johnson acquitted in assault case. Witnesses recant 1940. Dutch Schultz's assassins finally named. Johnson connection suspected 1943. Harlem's power structure. How Bumpy Johnson Controls the Numbers, 1952. Johnson released after 15-month sentence. Welcomed home by hundreds, by 6 p.m., Theodore had filled 17 pages of notes. His hands were shaking. His world had rewritten itself in 90 minutes. His father wasn't a consultant. His father was a gangster. Everything, the house, the school, the clothes, the books, the chess lessons, the quiet discipline, had been purchased with illegal money, built on violence. He sat in that library until 9 p.m., until the security guard told him they were closing. He went home to 455 Convent Avenue and waited. The confrontation March 23, 1955. 7:15 p.m. Bumpy arrived for their weekly dinner, a tradition they'd maintained for 18 years. He came through the door carrying Chinese food from Lee's on 125th Street, the same order every Wednesday: spare ribs, lo mein, egg rolls. Theodore was sitting at the dining room table, 17 newspaper articles laid out in chronological order. The room went silent. Bumpy set down the food slowly. He looked at the articles, then at his son. His face showed nothing, the same face he wore when sitting across from mafia dons or rival operators. When did you find these? Bumpy's voice was quiet, measured. Yesterday. Columbia Library. And what do you think you learned? Theodore stood up. He was tall now, 6 feet, lean, wearing the same pressed slacks and sweater vest he wore to school. But his eyes held something Bumpy had never seen before: judgment. I learned that everything in my life is a lie. This house, my school, the books, the clothes, his voice cracked. Who are you? Really? Bumpy pulled out a chair, sat down, looked at his son with an expression that would haunt Theodore for the rest of his life. Not anger, not shame. Resignation. Sit down, Theodore. No. Sit down. The command in Bumpy's voice was something Theodore had never heard directed at him. It was the voice that controlled Harlem. He sat. Bumpy spoke for 42 minutes without interruption. He told the truth, not all of it, but enough. Charleston. His brother's lynching. Arriving in Harlem with nothing. Stephanie St. Clair. The numbers. The violence. The money. The power. And the decision he'd made in a prison cell on April 12, 1937. I'm a criminal, Theodore. I ain't gonna insult you by pretending otherwise. I've hurt people, killed people, built an empire on things that'll send me to hell if there is one. Theodore's face was stone. But every dime I spent on you was clean, laundered through legitimate businesses I own. The trust fund Stephanie set up, legal investments. Your tuition, paid from rental properties. You think I'm lying? You can check the paperwork. That doesn't make it clean, Papa. No, Bumpy agreed. It don't. But it makes it separate. You didn't choose my life. I chose yours. Theodore stood again, started pacing. Why? Why go through all this? Why not just, because I didn't want you to be me? Bumpy's voice cracked for the first time Theodore could remember. The man who stared down Lucky Luciano, who survived 14 assassination attempts, who ran Harlem with an iron will. He looked, suddenly, like what he was, a 50-year-old man carrying 20 years of guilt. You were supposed to be different. Smarter. Legitimate. You were supposed to prove that Johnson blood could build things, not just break them. That was the plan. Theodore looked at his father, really looked at him, and understood something that would define the next 2 years of his life. His father had given him a choice, but the choice had always been Theodore's to make. I need time, Theodore said finally. I need to think. Bumpy stood, adjusted his jacket, walked to the door. He paused, hand on the doorknob. Didn't turn around. Take all the time you need, son. But understand this. I'm still your father. And I'm still Bumpy Johnson. Those things don't change. What changes is whether you can live with both. He left. The Chinese food sat untouched on the table. April 1955 to September 1957. The transformation. Theodore Raymond Johnson spent 7 weeks not speaking to his father. He spent those weeks in libraries, interviewing Harlem residents, without revealing who he was, reading sociology texts, studying criminal justice, and wrestling with a question that had no easy answer. Could he benefit from illegitimate means while pursuing legitimate ends? His mother, Mamie, finally intervened on May 10, 1955. Your father made mistakes, baby. But he made them so you wouldn't have to. You can hate what he is, but don't hate what he gave you, a choice. Most boys in Harlem don't get that. On May 12, 1955, Theodore showed up at Small's Paradise, the club on 135th Street, where Bumpy held court on Thursday nights. He walked past the bodyguards, who recognized him immediately and stepped aside, through the smoke and jazz and whispered conversations, to the back booth where Bumpy sat with 3 lieutenants. The lieutenants started to stand. Bumpy waved them off. Theodore slid into the booth across from his father. "I'm going to Harvard," Theodore said. "I'm going to study law, and when I graduate, I'm going to be a civil rights attorney." Bumpy's face showed nothing. "That's so. Yeah, but I need your help getting in. Donations, connections, whatever it takes. I'll use every advantage you can give me. And after, when you're a lawyer?" Theodore leaned forward. His voice was steel-wrapped in silk. His father's voice, deployed differently. "After, I'm going to defend people the system destroys. Poor people, black people, people like the ones you protect, but through law instead of force. I'm going to be what you would have been if you'd had the chance." That's when Bumpy understood what his son had become, not a rejection of Bumpy Johnson, but an evolution. The older man's eyes went glossy. He cleared his throat, extended his hand across the table. "Then let's get you into Harvard, Theodore Raymond Johnson." They shook, father and son, criminal and heir, past and future. By morning, every policy runner in Harlem knew Bumpy Johnson's son was going to be a lawyer, and God help anyone who stood in his way. September 15th, 1957. Harvard Law School, Cambridge, Massachusetts. Theodore Raymond Johnson arrived on campus with 2 suitcases, a full scholarship arranged through anonymous donors, and a secret that weighed 3,000 miles. His father had driven him personally, not in the Cadillac, but in the used Chrysler, wearing his plain gray suit. They'd stopped for breakfast in Connecticut. Hadn't talked much. Didn't need to. When they arrived at the law school dormitory, Bumpy had helped carry the suitcases to room 312. He'd looked around the small room, the narrow bed, the wooden desk, the shelf for books, and nodded once. "You got everything you need?" "Yeah, Papa. I got everything." Bumpy had extended his hand. Theodore took it. They stood there, hands clasped, 2 men who'd built a bridge between impossible worlds. "Make me proud, son." "I will, but on my terms." Bumpy smiled, a rare, genuine smile that cracked his face like sunlight through clouds. "That's exactly what I'm counting on." He left, drove back to Harlem alone. According to witnesses who saw him that night at Small's Paradise, Bumpy Johnson, who'd killed 5 men, survived 14 assassination attempts, and controlled $50 million in annual operations, sat in his booth and cried for the only time anyone could remember. By October 1st, 1957, every civil rights organization in Harlem knew Bumpy Johnson had a son at Harvard Law, and the donations started flowing through legitimate channels, carefully laundered, supporting the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, scholarships for black law students, voter registration drives. Bumpy never took credit, but everyone knew. June 1960. Theodore Raymond Johnson graduated Harvard Law School, second in his class. 1961. He joined the NAACP Legal Defense Fund under Thurgood Marshall. 1964. He argued his first case before a federal judge, defending 3 Harlem residents wrongfully arrested in a policy raid. He won. 1968. He opened his own practice, Johnson and Associates Civil Rights Law, for 55 Convent Avenue, Harlem. The address was intentional. His father had given him the building. July 7, 1968. Bumpy Johnson died of a heart attack at age 62, in the same brownstone where he'd raised his son. Theodore held his father's hand when he passed. At the funeral, over 1,500 people lined the streets of Harlem. Policy runners and preachers, criminals and civil rights leaders, people who'd feared Bumpy Johnson and people who'd loved him. Theodore gave the eulogy, 23 minutes long. He told the truth, not all of it, but enough. "My father was a complicated man who lived in impossible times. He made choices I could never condone, but he gave me the freedom to make different choices. And in the end, maybe that's the only redemption any of us can hope for, to raise children better than we were raised, to break cycles we couldn't escape ourselves." The room was silent except for crying. He used to tell me, "Think 3 moves ahead." I'm going to spend the rest of my life proving that those 3 moves can build instead of break. That Johnson blood can change the world through law, not force. That's his legacy, and I'll carry it with honor. By 1970, Every major civil rights attorney in America knew the name Theodore Raymond Johnson. By 1975, he'd argued before the Supreme Court. By 1980, he'd trained a generation of black lawyers who'd go on to reshape American justice. And he never forgot where it started. April 12, 1937, in a prison cell, when a criminal decided his son would be something better. Bumpy Johnson was born in 1905 and died in 1968. He controlled Harlem's underworld for 30 years. He made millions of dollars. He survived impossible odds. But his greatest victory wasn't territorial control or financial empire. It was Theodore Raymond Johnson, the son who became what his father never could be. Real power isn't forcing your children to walk your path. It's building a bridge so they can choose their own. Bumpy understood something most men never learn. Legacy isn't about replication, it's about evolution. He couldn't escape the streets, but he could make sure his son never had to enter them. Most men would have trained their son to take over the empire. But Bumpy Johnson wasn't most men. He trained his son to dismantle empires through law instead of force, to protect the powerless through courts instead of violence, to be the man Bumpy would have been if Charleston hadn't lynched his brother, if Harlem hadn't forged him in fire, if America had given black men paths besides crime or submission. Subscribe if you believe redemption isn't about erasing your past. It's about ensuring your future looks different. Hit that like button if you think real strength is breaking cycles, not continuing them. And comment below, what would you sacrifice to give your children a better life than you had? Next video, how Stephanie St. Clair, the numbers queen, held off the mafia and taught Bumpy Johnson everything he knew. But remember this, the strongest fathers aren't the ones who make their sons in their image. They're the ones who give their sons the tools to build their own. Bumpy Johnson understood that and changed history because of it.